Here we go. Roll video.
I think anybody creating something new must have an adventure.
It's not cinema, it's something else.
My advice to a young filmmaker is to make a movie every week.
The whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half.
But suspense is essentially an emotional process.
You gotta make films. You gotta make it and get it seen.
Cinema for me is a world of when I dream.
Welcome to Behind the Slate. I am your host, Aaron Strand, and it has been a minute since I've been able to say those words. It's been far too long since I posted a new episode. I have been trapped inside of an editing cave, finishing my forthcoming feature film. This work is progressing, and I'm nearing a point when it won't be taking every second of my professional life. I have said that same sentence for several months now, but I do think that this time it is actually true. These last 6 months have been quite a journey, which has included a crowdfunding campaign, a test screening, and I think I'm probably due to release an update episode about it. Of course, we've had multiple episodes about the pre-production and production process of this film, and I think it's time to talk a little bit about post-production because I certainly have thoughts and experiences to share, not all of which have been positive. There have been a lot of, let's just say, learning opportunities. I have still been doing the live shows here in Atlanta at the beautiful Plaza Theatre. Back in March, I had a fantastic screening of Midnight Cowboy, but unfortunately I experienced some technical difficulties and the audio proved to be unsalvageable. In the modern podcasting space, this kind of break feels almost like creator suicide. So for all of you listening, I am extremely grateful. Thank you to everyone who has continued to send me messages and DMs. I really appreciate it. Thank you for staying with me. I do sincerely look forward to a time in the very near future when I can get back to putting out regular episodes. But for now, I am sharing the audio from our most recent live show, which accompanied a screening of Hiroshi Teshigahara's Woman in the Dunes in 35mm. This film has long been one of my favorites, and I was so excited to share it with a live audience. I do want to apologize for any names that I mispronounced during the course of my presentation. I tried the best I could, but definitely still had some flubs. This audio was captured live on the night of the screening, courtesy of the Plaza Theatre, and I hope you enjoy. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Slate Presents. Woo! Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Yes, hello everyone. My name is Aaron Strand. I am the host of the Behind the Slate podcast. For those who don't know, Behind the Slate is a film history podcast where I take a historical deep dive into the life and work of cinema's greatest directors. You can check out our full-length series on Charlie Chaplin and Melvin Van Peebles, as well as our many interviews with scholars and filmmakers and journalists. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've never been to our live show before, the way this works is I come up here and I give a little like mini version of what I do on the podcast, which is really focusing on the historical context that allowed films to be made because, as we all know, art is not made in a vacuum. I then step aside, we watch the movie, and then for those who can stick around after the film, I open it up and hand over the microphone for a little post-film audience discussion. And all of this audio is being recorded for a podcast. It's going to be released next week, on next Friday. So pretty cool. So tonight we are really, really lucky because we get to watch this amazing 35mm print of one of the greatest independent films ever made. And I say independent film not in the sense of like, oh, this is like the independent studio subsidiary of Comcast independent film. I'm talking like real independent film. And what's so amazing about this is that this was an independent film made in 1964, which is a lot harder in many ways than making an independent film in 2024. What's more so is that this independent film was made in Japan. And in Japan, the film industry works a little different, particularly at that time. Now, in America, Does anyone know the year that the box office tickets peaked? As far as every dollar an American spent on entertainment, does anyone know the year that the highest percentage of that dollar went toward cinema? Does anyone have a guess? 83. Oh, fantastic guess. No, it was around 1930. Technically, American cinema peaked in 1930, just after the advent of sound. Little different in Japan. Things peaked in 1958. So the Japanese public was still really going to movies long after the Second World War. And the way this impacts the independent film world is that as long as all this money was pouring in, the Japanese film system became very hierarchical. If you wanted to be a director in the Japanese cinema, you had to devote maybe 5 to 10 years of your life as a film apprentice before you'd ever be trusted as a director. So the question is, how did we get from 1958 with this very hierarchical structure to 1964 when this movie goes and wins the grand jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival in only 6 years? And to tell this story, we really need to look at sort of the generational movement that this film took part of. And we're going to do that by talking a little bit about the film's director. So this film was directed by a man named Hiroshi Teshigahara. Teshigahara, he was born in 1927, and straight up, he's a Nepo baby, okay? His dad was this famous fine artist. He was an artist of the Japanese art of flower arranging called ikebana, and he ran these flower arranging schools. It was very successful. So young Hiroshi grew up with all the finest training, but all that privilege could not protect him from the Second World War. Now, the Teshigaharas were able to leave Tokyo in 1944, but when they came back in 1945, they found their home, their neighbors' homes, their neighborhood, their entire city reduced to rubble. And not only was this a shock on an individual level, but as artists whose very being was, this ikebana art form was all about making flowers adhere to the environment. So to see your entire environment, your entire life reduced to ash, it left this impression in young Hiroshi's mind, this question of, who am I? What does it mean to be a person, to be a neighbor, to be a citizen? And most importantly, what does it mean to be Japanese? Again, and this is the question that plagued the entire generation. They grew up believing that they were part of a capital G great empire. Now all of a sudden that empire has been burned to the ground, and the very people that did the burning are now their economic colonizers. So this generation is saying, who are we? What does it mean to be Japanese? And so they do what most young people do. They get together in groups and they start arguing about politics, and then they splinter off into other groups that argue with the first groups, and then they argue, and then they go out and they protest and they yell, and then nothing really happens. And then some of them say, oh, this protesting is too much, and then they go out and they form artist groups, and then they talk about what kind of art they can make, and then they argue and argue. And so they did that for a long time, and it was in that sort of political discourse that Hiroshi Teshigahara met his two lifelong collaborators, writer Kobo Abe and composer Toru Takemitsu. And these guys basically, they worked on some art and they dreamed of combining their art forms for about 10 years. Okay, so fast forward to the late 50s. The Japanese studio execs, they're rolling in dough, but they're feeling this generational pulse happening, right? And so they turn to these apprentice directors and they say, we want some youth-oriented films. Can you make some youth-oriented films for us? And they turn to guys with names like Nasama Oshima and Shohei Imamura and Seijun Suzuki, these guys that became established with the Japanese New Wave. And it's interesting to note that the Japanese New Wave did not happen outside of the studio system, it happened within the studio system. But they did not stay there for long. Nagase Oshima made a film in 1960 called Night and Fog in Japan. It was a very political film. It was about protests against the Japanese-American alliance. And after running in the theater for 3 days, the studio pulled the film. And Oshima, feeling that he was being politically censored, did something unheard of. He tore up his contract and he left the studio. And at any other moment in history, this would have been absolute career suicide. But it happened at a very advantageous moment because at the same time, there was a group in Tokyo coming together. They formed a group called the Artist Theater Guild. And originally they were going to play these European art house films, the Fellinis, the Bergmans. But when they heard that Oshima quit, they thought to themselves, well, maybe we could play some Japanese films too. And maybe we could have a policy where these Japanese films could get month-long runs at our 10 theater locations to actually build word of mouth. And I can't emphasize enough just how important ATG was to establishing the Japanese independent cinema movement. It would not have happened without a distribution system that was geared to supporting artists. Okay, this is like a personal pet peeve of mine because we lack this in so many ways in our modern streaming landscape. Okay, ATG was so critical. So Oshima's gone. ATG is just coming into being, and this happens at a very critical moment in our hero, Hiroshi Teshigahara's life, because he just comes back from this life-changing world tour with his father. His father went around the world teaching people how to do this flower arranging. He brought his son with him. They go to Spain, and he sees the architecture of Antonio Gaudi. And if you've ever seen Gaudi's architecture, it's this incredible Art Nouveau naturalist design. It looks like he pulled the buildings literally out of the rock from which they're made. And when he saw these undulating natural lines, he saw the boundaries between art forms dissolving. And next, his father takes him to New York City, and Teshigahara goes and sees all these cool avant-garde artists that are happening in New York. He goes and sees John Cage. He goes and sees Merce Cunningham. He goes and sees Martha Graham. And he looks around and he says, oh my God, all these people are combining art forms. They're not talking about it, they're actually doing it. I've got to do this. So he does what any inspired Nepo baby does. He asks his father for $100,000. Some things in entertainment never change. And he goes to his buddies, Kobo Abe and Toru Takamitsu, and says, well, let's make a movie. And so he makes their first feature film titled Pitfall. It's a weird movie. It's on Criterion Channel. You can check it out. But they secure one of the very first month-long runs at ATG. And at that same moment, Kobo Abe, the writer, comes out with his debut novel, Woman in the Dunes. And with these two coinciding forces, and the novel was a big hit when it came out. So these two coinciding forces, they go out, they're able to secure another private investment of $100,000, and they go out into the sand dunes outside of Mount Fuji, and they shoot this movie. This movie goes on to not just win the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes Film Festival, but Hiroshi Teshigahara, not Akira Kurosawa, not Yasuhiro Ozu, but Teshigahara becomes the first Japanese director to be nominated for an Academy Award. So as you watch this film, I beg of you to keep two things in the back of your mind. The first is just what a crazy a coincidence of circumstances and personalities that allowed this film to be made. Also, the fact that they were able to land the plane as well as they did is a freaking miracle. And finally, I want you to keep in your mind that the main question concerning these artists with everything that they're doing is a question of identity. And not the same questions of identity that factors into so much of our art forms now. It's a question of identity around who am I as a person, who am I as a citizen, and what does that mean in this greater connected world, okay? I'm gonna come back and talk, open up the discussion after the film, but for now, I'm gonna shut up so we can sit back and enjoy Hiroshi Teshigahara's Woman in the Dunes. Thank you so much. At this point, the projector began to roll and the film played. You can watch Woman in the Dunes by visiting your local independent video store, or you can stream it on Criterion Channel or rent it through Apple TV or Amazon. We will jump forward now to after the film's conclusion for a post-screening audience discussion. Instant reactions. And I know it's a little scary to go first. So I'm going to start things off with a new segment of these live shows called Low Rating Letterboxd Reviews. Okay, I've got a half-a-star Letterboxd review right here. Dog shit. Talentless director callously wastes audience's time with some bullshit that is probably symbolic or something. Okay, here's another one. 1 star. Quite a boring, painful watch. Way too long, too. Might be allegorical, but it was so unentertaining that I don't care. Some cool shots of sand, though. Okay, and then here's my favorite one. Okay, I actually kind of feel this one. Okay, 1 star. Feels like one of those movies put out by A24 that's marketed like a horror movie, but then the general audience hates it because it's just a tense drama. Unlike those movies, though, this one isn't that good. Okay, does anyone want to respond to some of these low-rating Letterboxd reviews? Anybody got anything? How did it make you feel? Did it make you feel like you wanted to take a shower? Yes? Do you want to wash the sand off? Okay, yes, thank you. Oh, hey, good to see you again, man.
Good to see you. Some initial remarks, just the shots of the cheek going down to the neck was amazing. Also, I wanted to say, it was one of the first behind the slate. What do you think about Spike Lee doing the high and low?
I mean, so for context, the very first behind the slate live show I did was of Akira Kurosawa's High and Low. If you don't know, Spike Lee is currently in production on a remake of this movie with Denzel Washington and Ice Spice, apparently. I mean, look, man, like, I'm not gonna see it. People can make whatever they make. I'm done trying to like mentally gatekeep in this industry, but they're not gonna earn my ticket. I'm just not that interested in seeing that movie remade, to be honest. Okay, anybody else have any thoughts about this one? Yeah.
Just a couple of thoughts. I really liked how the sand was both like super dry but also wet, not just like it being moist, but it like moving like water when it was pouring down. It was really interesting, I think. And then also like the whole time I was watching it, I was like, how long until I would just like completely lose it and like give in and just make it my new reality? And like the whole time I was like, is it better to like keep struggling or to resign? Because, you know, I forget the characters' names, but the man and the woman, the man was like always fighting up until like it seems the end. But the woman had just been like there for a while. And so I feel like the end bit with the water pump, it kind of made me feel like, oh, it's not really, you know, like the whole, what is it, the Plato's cave with like the shadows and stuff. It's not that about like, you know, is it a better reality to live in the city with other people or just in this hole where this is your whole reality? It's more just like, do you have something to work for? Whether it's just, I want a radio, so I'm going to do this mindless labor just because I have a goal to work for, or I want to make a water pump, you know? And so it's just like about, like, to be human is to like just have a goal to strive for, whether it's escaping your prison that you were trapped in or, you know, it changes depending on the circumstances.
I love that. I think that's really excellent. Yeah, do we have any other thoughts here?
Hi, so I've seen this movie a couple times, but I think that what I got from it was that the man really kind of came in with the new wave movement, and he was really kind of the youngsters that were coming up, and the woman kind of represented more of traditionalism. And so then you have the conflict of what happens when you have such a confined space of traditionalism versus new wave, and both of them want to live in the same aspect with each other. But then they're being buried within each other after the World War II. And so they're fighting, they're trying to figure out how they live within each other, and then the pump itself represents almost like a new life, new water, new wave, in essence, of coming forward. And so it's not so much that at the end of the day, the man who represents kind of the revolutionary movement is denying traditionalism, but the aspect that both can coincide with the idea of the trickling of need of life, which is water. How do you reflect each other? How does it come together? There's not a definite answer, but he doesn't leave simply because it is his home still. And how does that work with the need of life? How does he bring forward to traditionalism this idea of new wave? That's what I got. Oh, yeah.
This is more of a question. I'm a fan of Kobo Abe, the writer, but apparently in Japan he's more known as a playwright who directed his own stuff. So I'm curious, did the partnership between this director and Kobo Abe continue after this, or what happened with those guys?
Yeah, excellent question. So the Kobo Abe, Hiroshi Teshigahara, and Toku Taramitsu made 4 films together, starting with Pitfall, Woman in the Dunes. They then made Face of Another, and then the last film they made was called Man Without a Map, which came out in 1968. And that was the end of their sort of trio partnership. And the way that they made these movies was really collaborative. Even though they had these titles of director, writer, and composer, all three were involved from pre-production through production through post-production. They really kind of balanced each other out. I don't know why their collaborative effort ended, but they did not make a movie together after 1968. Even though all three went on to go do separate things. I believe it might have ended because Teshigahara's father died and he ended up taking over his father's Ikebana school. But I don't have a definite answer as to why their collaboration ended. So great stuff. So we got some deeper metaphors here, and this is definitely like a film that invites metaphors, especially when it came out like 1964, kind of like peak intellectual, like, what does this mean? So like, this is one that has been opened up and subjected to 1,001 think pieces. Oh yeah, what do you got?
To piggyback off some ideas that were said, the film feels very like anti-capitalist to me, where when she was saying like, why do you want, like, was waiting for you in Tokyo, like, even if he were to go back to his own life, ultimately he would still be working for someone else to get rich and stuff like that. It's like the same idea, like, why not leave the sand pit? Why not just leave like your apartment and stuff and just roam and be homeless? I mean, because your apartment is your home, it grants you safety, you get water, you get food. Like, why does anyone work, whether you're in the pit or you're in the city, it doesn't really matter. So that's what I was thinking about when I was watching the movie.
Very cool. I love that. And I feel like that really ties into sort of what you were saying earlier about, this sense of like, what's the difference between like where you end up as long as you have this little thing to work for. I always like, personally, I like to go start off, instead of with the metaphors, I always like to try to start off with the characters. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about our two main characters. So we have, we don't really know their names until the man's name until the very end of the movie. His name's Nikki Junpei. What do we think about this guy? Does anyone have any thoughts about this guy? Or does anybody have have any, and I'm also really looking at like where he starts versus sort of where he ends up.
I can't lie, I really fucking hated him at first. Yes. He's really annoying. He just kept fucking everything up. I'm like, can't you see, like, she has her own little thing going on? Like, he could have at least, like, observed, like, so, like, why is she doing all of this, and, like, caught on faster, but he was so stubborn on escaping, which I definitely understand that, but he was acting like an idiot.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, over here.
So, as the movie started, he's wandering, through these dunes in the desert looking for a bug, and he's looking for his success. And he's not finding it, and then he ends up in this dunes, with this woman, and he finds his success by creating a pump that can get them water. So I think for him, that was why he decided to stay, because that was the place that he could be successful, and because he was a failure trying to get out. And I think he finally came to a place where he found his success, and he was content with that.
I love that. Totally agree. Did I see you? Yeah. Here, let me scoot past you. Thank you.
Kind of think he's a guy that's he's intellectual, arrogant, but I think he's looking for some form of appreciation. Because in the beginning of the movie, he's looking for these bugs. He wants to be sort of publicized in some way or published in some way. But then he overall comes to accept his place. And then he's talking about how, this pump he's made, he's excited to tell it to the elders and stuff. And that's almost sort of the same thing almost in a certain respect, but in a different environment entirely. So that's kind of it. I think he starts off very arrogant, but kind of is humbled over time, but still kind of is looking for the same goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the experience kind of reframes his context of like, what does it even mean to be a citizen? And what does it mean, what is my citizenship like adhere to? And we could call it, sort of Stockholm syndrome, or sort of he's trapped in a somewhat prisoner's dilemma. But I think that Teshigahara is trying to get to something a little bit deeper about reframing your expectations in the eyes of others. Absolutely. Yeah, back here.
Yeah, to your point there, and with the bugs, I think the bugs sort of symbolize his transition in the film from initially representing like seeking glory, seeking affirmation. And then there's all this imagery of the bugs like trying to climb, falling down the dunes, and then the bug's sort of isolated. And he's kind of like that, right? He's sort of powerless. And then he keeps mentioning like, I won't die like a dog. And there's all this sort of animal imagery in this. And he's kind of this powerless like animal in this situation.
Yeah, well, I think that animal aspect is really interesting because he tries so hard to retain his humanity, which of course comes to the head during, the most difficult scene of the film, during this, attempted sexual assault at the behest of the villagers. And, particularly for a movie as old as this, coming from a very patriarchal culture like Japan at the time, you could see a scene like that and be like, ooh, like this really doesn't play in, probably didn't play great then, but really doesn't play in 2024. But I do think in this film, that scene serves this critical purpose within the story, because here he is saying, I won't die like a dog. I won't be chained like a dog. I'm a man. I'm a man. And then at this critical moment, he completely debases himself. And he even says, like, we're living like animals anyway. Why don't we just do it? And the fact that he fails and he is so embarrassed by his own actions, that is the sort of ego destruction that sets him up for this final act where he kind of begins to accept who he really is. Because he's at the beginning, he's so obsessed with labels. So he has that whole little monologue that he says to himself in the boat of people are obsessed with their certificates and degrees. He kind of contextualizes it in this, dreamy montage where we kind of assume that he has a wife, that someone cheated on the other one, because he says humans are obsessed with trying to keep others from cheating them, and all their certificates and degrees, keep them from that or whatever. And then of course that's what he counts on this whole time. Oh, these people are going to realize that I'm gone when I don't show up for work. Oh, the PTA is going to come save me. That's the most ridiculous one, that the Parent-Teacher Association is going to come looking for him. And ultimately that sort of that way of thinking, and that the way his identity exists in the modern world will not come save him. And that is a devastating realization, of course, for him, but it's a devastating realization for all of us as well. How much will our Instagram page come save us? So, should we end up in real trouble? Switching over,
Going back to the thing about the bugs, I thought it was interesting how I think 2/3 of the way through the film he burns the bugs. He doesn't care, but he's shallow in the sense that it's not a passion that he cares about. He just cares about that recognition. It doesn't matter what it is. It is the recognition that is validating to him. And kind of moving on to the woman, I think a lot of the emotional draw of the film comes from her. I teared up when I saw her just saying no at the end when she was being dragged out of that dune, just being ripped from this reality that she's known for so long, and kind of seeing how that attempted assault affected their relationship, where when they ask her how long she's been pregnant, she immediately knows the answer, and yet she hasn't even told him this thing. And I think that kind of shows the deterioration of her relationship, but still how attached she is to him and this dune in spite of all of that.
Yeah, wonderful. And great transition. Just real quick before we sort of wrap up, any other thoughts about her character? Because I find her absolutely fascinating, particularly, again, in the context of Japanese storytelling in the early 60s, where often you end up with 95% of the screen time being taken up by men. And she is, this character is so fascinating and is filled with real wants and desires and dimensions.
This is the third time I've seen this movie, and one of the reasons why it kind of captures my imagination is a little bit of the villager element, the kind of world, how that works. Something I always wonder about her specifically is how did she get there? Is she herself a victim of this situation that he's in as well, maybe when she was young or something like that? And but I always kind of think of it as is she a victim as well? Is she a victim of circumstance because of her her previous husband and daughter being killed as well? So I'm always kind of going back and forth in my head while I'm watching this movie is, how to define her almost in a respect, because she's so kind of I guess maybe as one person put it, very traditional in other respect, but you have like such sympathy for her because I feel like she's such bound by her circumstance a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see a response right back here.
Well, I think it's interesting because during this time period, you really see a big wave of kind of the form of Japanese feminism that was popping up during this time period in Tokyo. And so the work within it is kind of displaying her conflict because she grew up in this, she had the husband, she had the child. She's raised in this idea of the patriarchal system of the Japanese culture, but at the same time, like we have a very different aspect and like profile of Western European standards of what goes on here. And if we go back into a whole bunch of history, you're going to see within the Japanese era that like feminism versus like the masculine and whatnot is very different. And so she basically runs this household the entire time. She's the one that's telling him what to do. She's the one bathing him and he's acting like a child the entire time. So if you want to really look at it, it's almost like he's a side character and she's the main character that's running the story. And she's just in such want of love and compassion because she's been by herself, taking care of everything the entire time. And even when she ends up with the man that's supposed to help her with everything, that gets her rations, gets everything within the situation of post-World War II Japan, it's only because she needs this individual in order to function her household. It's not that she actually wants this individual. I mean, she wants companionship, but she needs this companionship in order to get her rations. She refuses to drink because she's afraid of what happens when she drinks, and then it's proven. She doesn't smoke because it hurts her throat, and she knows what she has to do. So, like, you see this idea that she still enacts the idea of this, like, traditional Japanese sense of, like, get things done. How do we make this work? And he's very much like a new wave of, like, oh, we feel and we understand and intellectualism, which is important, but it's just very contradictory to what has to be done within the situation that they're in.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the one thing that maybe would just not like contradict or just like adds another wrinkle that I find just so fascinating is her as the real initiator of the sexual experience, and that the sexual experience is framed in terms of her pleasure. You know what I mean? Like as that encounter happens.
The first Japanese book was written by a woman. It was made. The first Japanese book that we know within Western time period, it was written by a woman, and that had to do with court dates, and like the court and the courtesans that were happening within the Japanese. It's not the Meiji, but it's way before that. I forget the name of it. I'm so sorry in regards to that. She's an amazing author. Would fully recommend reading her, but I just can't remember. No, she's not. She's a higher ranking, but she would write about the sexual encounters that would happen within the palace, and like sex was just a free reigning thing within Japan. It was something that was normalized. So like the idea that we think that women wouldn't initiate sex, completely different within the Japanese culture.
Fantastic, great. You should do this more often. Real quick, anybody else had their hand raised? Cool. Well, I'm going to kind of just wrap it up here. You know, I really think that you guys hit upon all the main points that I really take away from this film, in that, you know, I do think that there's a pretty clear comparison to what Teshigahara experienced in his own life. I mean, I do think that him coming back to Tokyo after the bombing and seeing this desolate landscape and him finding himself and his sense of identity, his sense of hope for the future through the act of doing is ultimately what this story is about. You know, whenever you watch a horror film or anything like that, if you want to know what the movie's about, take away the monster. So if we were to take away the sand from this movie, what is it about? It is about this arrogant, dissatisfied, unhappy man who is searching for something, and ultimately he finds it in an unexpected way, making a water pump at the bottom of a sand dune. And I think that in that act of doing, he finds himself. And I think that ultimately for Teshigahara, it was the same thing. And that was an energy that ultimately sustained him through the rest of his life as he went on to live for another 40 years and ended up running his father's school and by all accounts was very happy. So that's what I got. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the film, and I'll see you next time. All right, good night.